So, challenges in the Middle East. Clearly, these have gotten far more difficult in recent days and recent weeks. It used to be you could just pick one or two nations, discuss them, and see that that would be a trouble point. Now, we've seen events in Tunisia, events in Egypt, in Yemen. And this all coming now around the same time that President Obama delivered his State of the Union address. And it was one of the weaker addresses when it comes to the Middle East in recent memory. He mentioned Afghanistan, or Afghan 8 times. He referenced Iraq, China, South Korea 4 times each. 3 mentions. India got 3 mentions. North Korea once. He didn't mention Israel or the Palestinian Authority at all, but his first 2 years have been relatively a debacle when it comes to that. So I'm sure he's looking forward to moving on. When it comes to Tunisia, he mentioned the desire to be free in Tunisia, where the will of the people proved more powerful than the writ of the dictator. And surprisingly, he didn't make any mention of Egypt, which is a much bigger concern for the United States, and those people had already been taking to the streets. When it comes to Egypt, and these events are still unfolding, it'll take time for us to see exactly what's going to happen. But we should bear in mind, population of Egypt, 80 million people. That you could take all of North Africa and combine it, and you still wouldn't have the population of Egypt, the most populous Arab country. 60% of the population lives on less than $2 a day, and President Mubarak has ruled for 30 years. The Egyptians have taken to the streets before, and that's especially when it involves food prices and living wages. But this is not the same situation as we saw in Tunisia, though they're likely inspired by the events there. In Tunisia, the military decided that it was not going to go against its people. In Egypt, the Central Security Forces will very likely go with Mubarak, and the army, if not, would at least likely back Mubarak. And we should remember that Mubarak is part of the Free Officers movement. He is a military man through and through. The protests so far have been widely based and so far secular and young, and they have not yet been Islamist in nature, though today being the Friday prayers at the mosque, it's, developments are happening as we speak. The unrest is in large part a response to government corruption and unemployment. We must also remember the U.S. gives $1.5 billion annually to Egypt in both economic and military aid. And since not much of this money reaches the people, it's going to be interesting. To see how he can ensure the loyalty of the military with the money going ahead. Mubarak's succession plan, a lot of this has to do with that, is that he would like his son Gamal to be the leader. Here we should also note it's interesting between monarchs and republics in the Middle East. It's essentially the same thing. When you look at Syria, went from Hafez al-Assad to Bashar. In Libya, we're looking at Muammar Gaddafi, then it'll be his son. This is, he wants to put his son in power. And that's now going to be exceedingly more difficult when Hosni Mubarak decides to stand down. Gamal, his son, also doesn't have any military background, and if the military is the group that's going to need to be behind you, that's hard to see that happening now, or harder. The person who will most likely end up at the end of this is Omar Suleiman, who is the intelligence chief there. He's someone the U.S. has dealt with a lot. He's someone who's well respected within the military. That likely won't make the people altogether happy, but this is a likely scenario. In Egypt, there is currently no unifying leader behind these protests right now. You've seen Mohammed al-Barde from the IEA come back, and it's kind of trying to squeeze himself into a leadership position where he doesn't have that much authority or backing right now. So it'll be interesting to see in Egypt what goes on, and we'll have to watch that through the days. And Lebanon is something I really want to concentrate on because this has extraordinary implications for the United States going forward. And this is a place that we have been scared of dealing with as a nation since the 80s and since the Marine barracks were exploded. The situation in Lebanon has always been a product of outside actors. This is where everyone in the region gets together and everyone has their horse. Above everything there looms the Special Tribunal for Lebanon and the indictments that will likely hold Hezbollah, Iran, and Syria responsible. The Special Tribunal was set out to investigate the suicide bombing that was from February 14th, 2005, that killed Rafik Hariri, the Sunni leader, former prime minister. And this gave birth to the March 14th coalition, which has since been crumbling. And it ended up with having Syria militarily driven out of Lebanon. For Hezbollah, any outcome that is going to suggest that it is responsible for Hariri's death is an existential threat to it. It would be seen, since they are a Shia organization, as though the Shias massacred the leader of the Sunni people there. So they really would like to see this tribunal go away, and they have not been able to do it yet. They've been trying to paint the tribunal as a non-starter. They've been trying to disavow it. They've been asking Hariri to do it when he was recently in government. They're also claiming that this is, of course, an Israeli set-up tribunal. It's a project of Israel and the usual. Hezbollah hoped that Hariri's sponsor, Saudi Arabia, would be able to get the prime minister to disavow this entire tribunal as part of a dialogue that Saudi Arabia was carrying out with Syria. This whole grouping wants Beirut against the tribunal, and the Saudis see such an agreement as a way of bringing Syria back into Lebanon. Their perspective in Saudi Arabia is that it's better to have an Arab country in charge of Lebanon than it is to have Iran and its proxy Hezbollah in charge of Lebanon. And that's their strategic interest. As a result, Hezbollah, with Syria's support, had forced the government to crumble, and they are no longer operating. Syria's main objective for itself is to restore its homogeny in Lebanon, and he wants to do it without having to confront Tehran and Hezbollah. Assad always looks to exact concessions from all sides by having pro-Syrian candidates put into key posts in the government and security forces. This is what Syria has done for a long period of time. It's never faced consequences for its actions, so there's no reason it assumes it should have to change. So according to Lebanon's constitution, the government falls, and the president holds a poll with parliamentary blocs to see who has the most votes to form the new government. So with the government in crisis, the Hezbollah's bloc refused to name Hariri again as the prime minister, and instead it tried to bring on another candidate, Omar Karami, who was a pro-Syrian former prime minister. So to gain the votes necessary, Hezbollah put pressure on Hariri's ally, which was the Druze leader, Walid Jumblat, to switch sides and vote for Karami. And Walid Jumblat of the Druze, he's gone from side to side so many times in the past decades. With him leaving the March 14th coalition, this has really brought the situation to where Hezbollah now has these votes. And a strong calculation Jumblat makes is that he knows no one in the West is actually going to stand up and back Lebanon or the March 14th coalition. So there's a long precedent of Syria killing its leaders that it does not like. In Lebanon, clearly he does not want that to happen. This actually putting up Karami as a candidate was a Syrian tactic, which is a bait-and-switch maneuver. They're trying to bring in now, which they succeeded, Najib Mikati. He's a wealthy Sunni candidate also. He's very pro-Syrian. And the majority of Sunni parliamentarians refused to back him, but he won the votes nonetheless. So he's now the new prime minister there. The implications for everything here is that they would like to have the special tribunal now with the new government. They want, again, the special tribunal to be disavowed by Lebanon for them to withdraw any support, anything from the Lebanese judges and that. And the problem is, not the problem, the special tribunal will get funding elsewhere. It will continue to go forward. So this is going to be a major problem ahead. A crisis between Lebanon and the international community is very much assured coming up. And also, Washington needs to note that they've been funding the Lebanese armed forces before. And they stopped funding them for a period in August after there was a border incident, and they restarted funding again. The problem with the border incident was it was the Lebanese armed forces firing against Israel. And it turns out we're not entirely sure to what extent the Lebanese armed forces are penetrated by Hezbollah. But regardless of that, going forward, if we're going to have Hezbollah in control of Lebanon, the entire country, then they're going to control the armed forces to begin with. So it would be weird for us to be obviously paying money to Hezbollah. When it comes to interesting release, the Palestine papers that have come out from Al Jazeera and The Guardian in the past few weeks, which are kind of a WikiLeaks of documents from peace negotiations in recent years. They detail meetings between U.S., Palestinians, and Israelis when it comes to negotiations. Now, we're here at an impasse in peace negotiations that's largely of President Obama's making. His decision to call for a settlement freeze before was a more absolutist position than the Palestinian Authority had themselves. They were willing to negotiate over that. This was a tactical diversion. Most telling, it's interesting, in one of these Palestine papers that were discussed, the actual neighborhood of Jerusalem, the area Ramat Shlomo, was discussed that Saeb Erekat said would be part of the areas transferred over to Israel in a final status negotiation. So President Obama actually made a point of an area that was viewed as a settlement that was actually already agreed to between Israelis and Palestinians. It was a moot point to begin with, and he still persisted in this. So it says a lot about his approach to the peace process. This also shows a very wide disconnect between the Palestinian Authority, the positions that they publicly hold, and those of the actual people. Because since these statements came out that Saeb Erekat made and that others have made, that they are somewhat more willing than their people know to make peace, that they realize that the refugees are not all going to be able to return to Israel. That's obviously a non-starter. But now the retrenchments are the same thing. I've promised all of Jerusalem, all Palestinian refugees will return, and it's back to where we were a long time ago. It's going to make any forward momentum on the peace talks be almost impossible. And we should also note that everything else going on in the Middle East right now, for as much energy as Obama has put into the peace process, everything that's going on right now with Lebanon, Tunisia, Egypt, Iran, this all has nothing to do at all with Israel. These are really big issues. So I think this is going to be an issue that's put on the back burner right now. And obviously the biggest issue in the House is still dealing with Iran's nuclear program, and Iran, who supports all of these horrible movements such as Hamas and Hezbollah, who is trying to be the kingmaker in the Middle East.